Hello, everybody. Hopefully, you guys can see us. So if you are able to pop in on a chat and let us know that you are able to see the screen that says Alcohol Home Deliveries Enforcement Challenges, we'd really appreciate that. And so I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today. Let's see. Okay. So I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today, Alcohol Home Deliveries and Enforcement Challenges, and NLLEA webinar hosted by NABCA. We have an expert panel of speakers today, and before I introduce them, I wanted to address a few housekeeping notes. First, let me introduce myself. I am Maggie Barshini in the Communications Department at NABCA. And also serving as co-organizers for this webinar with me today are Cassie Greisen and Rachel Coe in the Public Policy Department at NABCA. This webinar is one of a series of several planned through 2020. Another webinar about alcohol use during the pandemic is planned for September 24th at 2 p.m. And we have scheduled a webinar titled Trade Practices in the 21st Century, the Manufacturing Chair for early October. So now back to today's webinar. It will be about 1.5 hours in length, depending on the number of questions posed. And if you have any questions, please type it in the Q&A or in the chat window that should be located on the right-hand side of your screen. And several of you have already done this, but those that haven't, if you'd like to, feel free to introduce yourself. Type in where you're from or your organization. You're very welcome to do that as well. And at the end of the presentation, Cassie will come back in and ask questions for the panelists to address them. Also want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded and will be available through the nabca.org website within 7 to 10 business days. And so now I'd like to pass on the presentation to Carrie Christophus, Executive Director of the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association. And she will introduce others on the panel. So Carrie, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for taking time to be a part of this webinar. So as Maggie said, I am Carrie Christophus. I am the Executive Director for the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association. And today you're going to hear from my colleagues in alcohol law enforcement, and some of what they're going to discuss requires a bit more context. And I will be providing that high-level overview before you get a deeper dive into their state-specific information. As many of you know, laws vary significantly state to state, so this high-level overview will give us the footing we need to move through the rest of the presentations. With me today is Chief Tom Kirby of Virginia and Chief Ted Mahoney of Massachusetts. Tom currently serves on the NLLEA Executive Board, and Ted has served as a past president of the NLLEA. Before I get into today's presentation, I would like to share a little bit about my background. I have worked in both law enforcement and prevention, having 6 years in law enforcement and 15 years working for a single county authority in the state of Pennsylvania as the Deputy Director overseeing the Prevention Department for 3 counties, and managing several grants to include the Enforcing the Underage Drinking Laws grant and the Drug Free Communities grant. Some of you might remember the UDL grants. Our main focus was environmental prevention to reduce underage drinking through increased enforcement of underage drinking laws, conducting training for law enforcement, and age compliance checks. This was accomplished by creating an underage drinking task force made up of local, state, university, and liquor control enforcement. I am from the state of Pennsylvania, and I have worked specifically with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Liquor Control Enforcement and the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board on these efforts. So now I would like to talk about the NLLEA. We are a nonprofit organization Our membership is mainly made up of alcohol law enforcement and regulatory agencies, along with local, state, and university police departments. We currently have membership from 40 states, the District of Columbia, and Canada. We would love to have membership from all 50 states and expand our reach to more local and university law enforcement, as we know these agencies work hand in hand. I'd like to move on and introduce our executive board on the next slide. There we go. So our executive board is made up of 5 members, and we currently have Greg Croft, who serves as our president from Ohio, John Yeomans, who serves as our vice president from Delaware, Todd Merlina serves as our secretary treasurer from Pennsylvania, Tom Kirby as our sergeant at arms from Virginia, and Robert Casilla is our immediate past president from Delaware. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the NLLEA services. Some of the services we provide our membership and partnering agencies include collection and dissemination of law enforcement data. This is accomplished externally by sharing of information among agencies and internally through NLLEA survey collection and compilation. We are currently in the process of putting together a virtual library of trainings that will be available to our membership. It is not uncommon for our membership to contact me requesting information on statutes, rules and regs, policies and procedures. I can then put that information out to our membership chiefs and directors, or I may have that information readily available through one of our internal surveys. Our membership is great at information sharing and networking, and that is truly one of the assets of our membership. Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about our membership benefits. The NLLEA is the national voice with expertise on all matters related to alcohol law enforcement. NLLEA trainers are subject matter experts in alcohol law enforcement and therefore promote best practices in alcohol law enforcement, such as age compliance checks, licensee inspections, place of last drink, source investigations, and fake ID detection. We are currently working on some best practices in direct-to-consumer compliance with our direct-to-consumer work group, age compliance checks with home delivery, and virtual licensee inspections. I want to spotlight results from 2 recent surveys from our data collection efforts, one related to direct-to-consumer efforts that will be used to establish best practices, and the other is our salary survey that is currently being used to weigh enforcement capacity. Now I want to talk a little bit about the NLLEA awards program. We are now accepting nominations for our awards program. Details are available at our website, as you can see, nllea.org. If your agency, group, or coalition, because I feel we have many coalitions on the call today, or prevention leaders, is working in your community to reduce the prevalence of alcohol-related harm, you might be interested in submitting for either the Innovative Alcohol Law Enforcement Program of the Year or the John W. Britt Community Service Award. And I believe they're going to put the link in the chat to where you can access that on our website. There is a deadline of August 31st, so please get those in. Okay, so we are speaking today about the challenges around direct shipping and home delivery of alcohol and how law enforcement is handling this new era of liquor regulation and enforcement. Back in May, after one of our virtual NLLEA Chiefs meetings, and hearing the challenges that alcohol law enforcement was starting to face as they were getting back up and running after the shutdown, it was evident that we needed to put out a letter to our membership to support them in their efforts and remind them of best practices in conducting underage alcohol compliance investigations. As this advisory stated, Nationwide, 32 states plus the District of Columbia have relaxed licensing laws to allow bars and restaurants to sell sealed, unopened bottles of wine, beer, and spirits. Of those states, almost 20 are also allowing sales of pre-made cocktails to go. Our membership alcohol law enforcement agencies that were back up and running and had the capacity to conduct underage alcohol compliance checks in response to reports and complaints of youth accessing alcohol through these new access points of home delivery and curbside pickup were reporting an estimated 80% violation rate of alcohol being sold or provided to a minor. Alcohol law enforcement agencies were also reporting investigations involving third-party delivery services, leaving alcohol on doorsteps with no verification as to the age of the recipient, and underage youth decoys picking up to-go orders of food and alcoholic beverages curbside without being asked to provide proof of age. So as we move into our next slide, I'm going to talk about the alcohol beverage marketplace and the challenges that enforcement is having. So as the alcohol beverage marketplace changes rapidly with the deregulation of alcohol control policies, the dismantling of the three-tier system, increased licensing in non-traditional retail settings, and expanded distribution channels through home deliveries of alcohol, comes increased responsibilities for alcohol law enforcement and alcohol regulatory authorities to maintain compliance and an orderly and safe alcohol marketplace to protect the public's health and safety from alcohol-related harms. As we navigate this new era of liquor law enforcement, due in part to the national pandemic caused by COVID-19, alcohol law enforcement has been bombarded by the ever-changing temporary accommodations and proposed legislation. In some states, legislation is being introduced to make these temporary privileges permanent as a means to help mitigate lost revenue, with little discussion about the impact on alcohol law enforcement. Here's a list of alcohol law enforcement is reporting in regards to direct shipping and home delivery and increased consumer convenience as a response to the pandemic. So these are just some of our challenges. I could probably have a webinar on each one of these challenges. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just wanted to highlight a few, and especially enforcement capacity when we're looking at the ratio of alcohol law enforcement agent to outlet, and just provide a brief example of what that entails. So in the state of Maine, their alcohol outlets have doubled over the past 5 years, while their alcohol law enforcement inspectors have remained the same. Yet the requirements to monitor and ensure compliance among the licensee community is still their charge. So as we move to the next slide, I want to provide a brief overview of some processes, terms, and definitions. I'm going to start out with the three-tier system. This will help to set the stage. The three-tier system is a structure of checks and balances that provides safe alcohol to the consumer while ensuring a simple method to collect tax revenue. The three-tier system is as simple in theory. Manufacturers or producers provide alcoholic products to the wholesaler, who then distribute the products to the retailers who sell to the consumers. No one entity can be involved in more than any one tier under most state models, and each tier is regulated and licensed separately. The three-tier system is a safeguard for consumer protection and public safety. Now let's talk about direct shipping. Direct to consumer shipping is the shipment of product, in this case alcohol, directly to the consumer without relying on traditional stores. This can be both inter and intra-state shipments. This removes the wholesaler and the retailer tier, which is a checks and balances for tax collection, tainted product, and identification. Common carriers is a company that transports goods, or in this case, alcohol. Our primary carriers are FedEx and UPS. In talking about direct shipment and fulfillment centers, so fulfillment centers are a third-party logistics warehouse where incoming orders are received, processed, and filled. A fulfillment center exists to get online orders to consumers in a timely fashion and relieve e-commerce companies of managing this process. This slide reviews home delivery, the process by the retailer through a third party or contracted delivery service. Delivery of product, alcohol, directly to the consumer, where the retailer delivers the product using their own employees. Or in this case, this would be third-party delivery, which provides customers with a platform to provide menus, place orders, and have food delivered to their doorstep by a third-party courier. Examples could be Grubhub, Uber Eats. In this process, it is difficult to conduct age compliance checks, and Tom and Ted will expand on this in their slides as well. In discussing home delivery through an online e-commerce platform such as Drizzly, where users use a variety. They can order a variety of beer, wine, and spirits directly from local retailers to their location through a mobile app. And like I said, an example of that is Drizzly, as you can see in this slide. Okay, these next couple of slides are going to take a look at the policy landscape of direct shipment at a high level on which states permit direct shipping of some form of beverage alcohol. This is according to SAMHSA's STOP Act report to Congress. So this was from 2018, and this data reflects 2017. So this is the latest comprehensive data that we have available. So just keep that in mind when looking at these maps. Direct shipping permitted by beverage type. When you drill down to beverage category, there are fewer states that permit all forms of beverage alcohol, and some states simply exclude the practice outright. Keep in mind again that these slides are from 2018, STOP Act report to Congress, 2017 data. This landscape has changed so much, kind of on a daily basis. So just keep that in mind as well. Talking about home delivery, looking at the policy of third-party delivery across the country, fewer states permit this practice according to this 2018 data. Again, the caveat is this is 2017 data, and we know this area of policy is moving rapidly. So this picture may be out of date, but it gives you a snapshot nonetheless. Looking at home delivery permitted beverage type. However, those states that do not permit home delivery, the majority of them permit all beverage categories to be delivered direct to consumer. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the NLLEA specific data. In June of this year, the NLLEA, through the direct-to-consumer work group, developed a survey to gather some baseline data on direct-to-consumer shipping and delivery. The survey was sent out to NLLEA membership, with 22 states responding. This slide is hard to see, but we asked alcohol law enforcement what suspected unlawful activity in your agency, what are you finding with direct-to-consumer shipping? And we received the following responses. So we can go to the next slide that kind of drills this down a little bit, where you can see. And these were some of the responses. They reported unlicensed permitted shipper, failure to pay proper alcohol excise tax, failure to pay proper alcohol sales tax, failure to properly verify age of the consumer upon delivery, and unauthorized alcoholic beverages, meaning shipments of unauthorized alcoholic beverages. And again, Tom and Ted will talk more about these unlawful activities and how their agencies are implementing strategies to deal with these occurrences. Talking about direct-to-consumer shipping challenges, we asked this question too: what are your challenges in the survey? This was an open-ended question, and these were some of the top responses. Proper licensing to send product into a specific state based on that state's statutes, verification of permit status of sender, proper labeling on shipping containers, verifying what is being shipped, that it is alcohol, and customer shipment information or recipient of delivery. In talking about fulfillment center challenges, again, we asked this on the survey. This was an open-ended question, and these are some of the top responses. Not permitted or licensed, that the fulfillment centers aren't permitted or licensed, that they're not receiving reports or they're under-reporting, they're not getting disbursement reports, or providing records to enforcement. So why are these challenges important to talk about? When we're talking about enforcement capacity challenges, these all lead to enforcement capacity challenges, and this is the topic of our presentation today. When we look at the time and the effort that goes into ensuring that direct shipping and home delivery of alcohol is being conducted lawfully, and with all the safeguards in place that the three-tier system provides, and we look at the expansion of alcohol availability and accessibility, and take into consideration outlet to alcohol law enforcement ratio in many states, the demand on alcohol law enforcement resources has hit a crescendo, and few states are discussing the impact on alcohol law enforcement resources, which may lead to unintended consequences. We need to ask the questions: why are we in a rush? And what will be the long-term effects of these changes? Should on-premise be permanently allowed to serve as off-premise? Is this suitable for a fair marketplace? Open containers and vehicles with mixed drinks to go, will this contribute to DUI? Consumer protections with counterfeit alcohol and bypassing the three-tier system. And some of the new trends that we are seeing with Facebook drinking parties, alcohol trucks, trunk parties, and maybe if you haven't heard some of these, we could do another webinar on trends. And this just kind of presents what we see on a daily basis with the headlines. And it's hard to track all of it. As we go into the next slide though, NABCA does have resources. You're going to hear about changes to alcohol policy environment related to COVID-19 from the other presenters. And I wanted to make sure that if you're outside of Virginia and Massachusetts, you know where to go to find similar information. The NABCA interactive dashboards track day by day the policy changes impacting alcohol outlets, bars, restaurants, and traditional off-premise outlets as it relates to COVID-19. You can find these data dashboards on the website, and I think they'll probably put that in the chat as well. And here is a snapshot of what you'll see on those dashboards. And that is all I have. I know we will entertain questions at the end, and I am now going to pass it off to Chief Tom Kirby from Virginia.
Good afternoon. As Carrie said, I'm Tom Kirby, Chief of Law Enforcement for Virginia ABC. And feel free, if anyone is having any difficulty hearing me, picking up any echoes, to put something in the chat. And I'm sure somebody, one of my fellow panelists or I will hopefully catch it in the chat. I'd like to thank NAPCA and NLLEA for inviting me to participate in this panel today, and also to be joining some of my experienced colleagues on this with Ted and Carrie. Thank you. So I wanted to begin today talking about direct shipping in the United States, and Carrie has done a great job at giving you an overview. I do like to point out a disclaimer that a lot of my background and expertise is going to be in Virginia law. However, I am going to try to touch on the broader topics that affect every state that is represented today in the audience, so that you can be aware of this topic and the fact that it is increasing day by day. In Virginia, we basically talk about the direct shipment of beer and wine directly to the consumer on behalf of a winery, brewery, or retailer. There are many states that only allow the direct shipment of wine, for example. There's also other states that will not allow a retailer from another state to ship. And those are just some of the differences that you'll see throughout the presentation. Currently, there's 45 states in the District of Columbia that allow some form of shipment. And I quote that as coming from the direct-to-consumer wine shipping report, but I also caveat, as you saw on the previous maps presented by Carrie, and she did a great job at explaining that it's changing every day. I believe that this data is actually changed already as well. It's almost difficult to keep up with when each state is responsible for regulating the shipping of alcohol based on their regulatory and legislatures and within the individual states. You can see in 2019, we had a increase of 7.4% to $3.2 billion in direct to shipping wine. You can see that is a big demand, and that has certainly not slowed as we've approached this pandemic. Some of those rapid growth of this market has created lots of challenges for alcohol law enforcement, which is why we're here today. And some of those challenges are jurisdictional issues. Virginia ABC, just like Ted in Massachusetts, only is responsible for that state. Often the actions of these licensed shippers are occurring outside of our jurisdictional boundaries. They occur in a different state. There's also regulatory constraints. They are anywhere from manpower to the large volume of information. We're going to discuss that in a little bit of what we have to go through to try to regulate this activity. And then I also, since we do have such a diverse audience here, I would like to empower you all to learn who your regulators are in each state. As you will, here from Virginia, we have law enforcement authority, so we're sworn law enforcement officers, and we cover all regulatory investigations and criminal investigations that occur on a licensed establishment. There are other states where they only have regulatory authority, and there are even states where they let the law enforcement piece be handled by local law enforcement officers. I do have a preference to that, and that I believe that the Virginia model is a great model because you handle both the regulatory and the criminal. You often will see that those items go hand in hand with one another, and often when you find out that the law enforcement responsibility has been passed on to a local authority, then often it's being prioritized with all the other items that a local law enforcement agency has to police. And often it's not a priority like it is here in the state of Virginia. This here again is just a breakdown of the country and where we were at 2017 data going into 2018. But I think it helps set the picture that every state is different in what they allow, and that presents some of the challenges that we're talking about today, as that there's no currently there's no federal guidance on this. It's just regulated by the states, and every state is a little different. Carrie did a great job of giving an overview of direct shipping versus delivery. And as is the same here in Virginia, we utilize those two terms as well. Direct shipping for us means that it's being shipped via a common carrier. In Virginia, we have 3 permitted common carriers. Not every state licenses or permits their common carrier. Virginia does. And right now, our 3 are FedEx Express, FedEx Ground, and UPS. So if you're going to ship product either from outside the state or from within the state, maybe to an external customer, you have to use a common carrier. Delivery for us is when one of our licensees that has the privilege to sell at retail delivers a product to a consumer at their house or perhaps place of business. Some examples of those, as Carrie mentioned, are your Uber Eats and your Instacart. While in Virginia, we do not license the actual third-party vendors, we do require them to enter into an agreement with the licensee who we do license, and all responsibility of that third-party vendor is passed on to that licensee, and that's within our laws. There are some states out there that actually license the third-party delivery vendors, but Virginia adopted a different model, and up to this point has been successful in regulating our market using that model. I wanted to cover COVID-19 and alcohol. It is certainly changing the alcohol law enforcement market, but more importantly, I wanted to highlight some of our responses. I'm going to talk about Virginia, but as Carrie noted, and NAPCA has the resource for you to check your specific state, many of the states followed very similar processes in changing their current regulation. Again, being partial to Virginia, I would like to offer that I believe that we were the best. But again, other states that are represented here today will find some argument with that, I'm sure. So our response was in reference to a lot of the stay-at-home orders that were issued out by either the governor of the state or maybe through some sort of legislation that essentially had a devastating impact on our licensee community, from restaurants, grocery stores, places of entertainment. Often these locations had alcohol licenses, and when these orders came out and restrictions on occupancy, it essentially meant that many of these locations had to close their doors. So in Virginia, some of the regulations that we adopted and or eased dealt with the privileges that each location is given. So many of our restaurants in Virginia had on-premise licenses only. So when that occupancy was reduced to perhaps 10 customers, essentially that restaurant could no longer exist. So ABC was able to ease some regulations that allowed those to become on-premise and off-premise so they could have a to-go business. And along with that, we also allowed all of those establishments to make delivery. So you can see that we went from a market that was already exploding to allowing it as an option for all licensees in Virginia that were able to get that off-premise designation, which we did through an automatic order from Virginia ABC. During this time, we did keep a close eye on trying to maintain public safety and public health. And some of that way we did that was through the way we regulated this activity. For example, those that had a mixed beverage license for the first time that I'm aware of, certainly in the state of Virginia, but through many, many states throughout the country, this is the first time that you saw the term cocktails to go, where people were allowed to go to a restaurant and order 2 mixed beverages or multiple mixed beverages, and then get in a car and drive home with those drinks. That is something that's usually regulated quite well in most jurisdictions. So the way that Virginia ABC approached this, and many states did, was trying to put some parameters around these allowances that we had given in order to maintain that public safety and public health. So in Virginia, we required that you have a sale of food with that alcoholic beverage. We limited the number of alcoholic beverages. We limited the quantity. We had regulation that talked about the container, sealed tops, no sipping holes. And this was all geared towards trying to discourage the activity of drinking and driving, consuming alcoholic beverage in a car through an open container. We were all trying to prevent that and maintain some public safety while trying to create some financial survivability of our licensee community. We also allowed wineries, breweries, and distilleries to have the option for delivery and to-go sales. And at the same time that this was going on, we had also seen some activity in our General Assembly where our Virginia distillery stores, which are Virginia distillers who have entered into an agreement with Virginia ABC that essentially makes them an agent of Virginia ABC and allows them to sell and serve the product that they manufacture on premises. we had seen a study be issued from the General Assembly, and during this time, we're also permitting them to ship within the state of Virginia distilled spirits using a common carrier, and this is part of a legislative study. And also, since Virginia ABC is a control state, which means that we control the retail sales and the distribution of all distilled spirits in Virginia, we have also launched a pilot home delivery program in currently one store, and we're looking to expand that in a few weeks into some other stores as well. Again, just trying to manage the demand that's going on from the consumer. So as I mentioned earlier, each state is responsible for their own legislation or regulatory rules around direct shipping. And that goes from trying to determine the product that they will allow to be shipped into their state. Some states may only allow wine, some states wine and beer, and we're now even seeing a number of states that are actually allowing wine, beer, and distilled spirits to be shipped into their state. They get to impose limits on those, and on this slide here, I do highlight some of those limits for Virginia. And they also get to decide, how they're going to ship that product in. Again, I explained to you that Virginia adopts the model that you have to utilize a common carrier, and that common carrier has to be permitted by Virginia ABC. Each state is a little bit different in their approach. In Virginia, we have a limit on the amount of product that can be delivered, shipped, and that's 2 cases of wine or 2 cases of beer per month per adult resident of the house. It is for personal consumption only. So this does not interfere with our 3-tier system that Carrie mentioned. We do not allow the shipping of wine and beer to retail licensees. That's reserved to our wholesalers. And the common carriers are responsible for submitting reports to Virginia ABC, which is one of the items that we use in our enforcement effort, and I will expand on that in a couple slides. We also require the common carrier to include the shipper's license number. Understand that that shipper license number is a unique number to Virginia. It is something that someone that's out of state has applied and qualified for that license. And again, our requirement is that they have to be a retailer, winery, or brewery in order to qualify for that license. It's a fairly simple process to go through. It's not long, it's not intensive. It only costs $230, so it's not a financial impairment to get it. And once they get that license, then they're able to ship into Virginia. And I note there that Virginia is in the top 10 direct-to-consumer shipping states for wine, representing 168,000 cases in 2019. I mentioned that the common carrier and the direct shipper are responsible for producing reports for Virginia. And this slide here highlights the information that we gather from those slides as we look to do enforcement effort. And just to represent which these reports, kind of the amount of work that goes into these reports. So since we have 3 common carriers in Virginia, I'll highlight the common carrier report there. That report comes in monthly, and it contains the information listed here on the slide. It takes, from a resource standpoint, it takes an analyst 40 hours per report for a total of 120 hours each month just to go through and analyze the report and match it to our licensed shippers list. And then they probably spend the other 40 hours kind of combining the 3 reports and pulling out the unlicensed shippers so that we can then start taking some enforcement action on that. But it's very, very resource intensive to go through these reports. Just as Carrie indicated, the issues facing Virginia are very similar to the issues that are facing your state. You'll hear Ted speak in a few minutes. They're the same issues that are facing Ted in his state as well. Unlicensed shippers, one of our top concerns in Virginia is around unlicensed shippers. We've created a path forward for individuals that want to ship product into our state. Of all the states, again, some states will only allow a winery or brewery to ship into Virginia, but Virginia allows a winery, brewery, or a retailer, as long as they're licensed in their home state to do that activity, to ship into Virginia, so it's fairly broad. The other issues that face Virginia is shipping from an unapproved address. So we have a number of shippers who will get a license for one location, but then they decide to expand their business and they ship from different locations in different states and sometimes under different names. So it's very difficult for us to track those shipments. We also deal with overshipment. We indicated on a couple slides prior that we have a limit of 2 cases per month. We are having some shippers that ship in excess of that. I highlighted the reporting requirements that we have, and then also underage access. We have very good established programs for underage checks of our typical brick and mortar stores. And then, of course, delivery or shipping to prohibited persons. In Virginia, we don't allow you to sell product to a person that's intoxicated. I think that our licensees in our normal licensed establishments receive lots of training and are very good at that activity. However, it does present challenges when you have a common carrier or a third-party delivery person that is making those deliveries. Just the interaction, right? I mean, so when someone comes into a restaurant and they spend some time sitting in there going over the menu, it's limited. It's a period of time that they have to evaluate that person. Often, you know, when you make a delivery of alcohol, it's that knock at the door, and it's an interaction of probably 30 seconds to make that determination in reference to age and delivery to a suitable person. So those are things that are very concerning to alcohol law enforcement as this market continues to explode across the country. Talk a little bit about Virginia ABC's response. It really started to pick up back in 2017. We started to see the market change. And this was not just for alcohol. This is for probably all of us in our daily lives. Before I started this conference, I had a couple of deliveries that came via FedEx, you know, from, you know, like a large department store like Lowe's, and then some other packages. And it seems like yesterday there was 2 or 3 packages that came as well. So no alcohol packages though. But as the market has exploded, as we see the Amazon and the desire to have our groceries delivered, and certainly that's been beneficial during this pandemic, we've seen that explode in the alcohol market as well. And starting back in 2017, we began to examine this in Virginia and really pay close attention to what was going on in the market. We worked with our alcohol law enforcement partners from across the country. We met with members of NAPCA and NLEA, and then of course, very important is to include our industry stakeholders who also had concerns and were able to help us tremendously in the market and how this new market is functioning. So what we did in Virginia was we had a 3-phase approach. We started off with research and developing a plan. Then we started with an initial implementation, and now we're into phase 3, which is evaluate and continue enforcement. And I will tell you that evaluate and continue enforcement is not stopping. It is continuous. And as this demand and as more and more individuals elect to ship alcohol and the products that are being shipped are expanded, it's only an increasing challenge for alcohol law enforcement. Part of that as well, as you heard Carrie mention, in 2020, NLEA established a direct-to-consumer work group that was bringing together many of the states across the country that were already working on this topic and getting us the opportunity to share ideas, to also look at individuals that were violating the law, compare notes, look at our enforcement efforts, our plans. And it's been a great partnership that has come out of that, and we're continuing that effort into the future. Wanted to give a little bit of a background and analysis on where Virginia started at when we really got in there in 2018. We had 1,171 out-of-state shippers that were licensed to ship into Virginia. And when we did some examination of what was being shipped into Virginia, you can see there that we had approximately 27,000 transactions in a short period of time between June and September of 2018 that were unlicensed transactions. So they were being shipped by a unlicensed shipper from out of state that likely, since they didn't even have a license, they certainly were probably not following our guidance. None of that information was being captured on shipper reports, and that was also resulting in a loss of revenue. We estimated the excise tax for that to be about $63,000, and that does not include the Virginia sales tax as also. So this really kind of illustrates when you have unlicensed shippers, the problem that your states face, as we know that every state has difficulty, and certainly in these trying budget times, that's not going to get any better in probably the near future. But when you have individuals that are essentially bad actors that are not complying with the regulatory framework in your state, that's lost revenue that can be used for various programs, can be used for additional enforcement resources. So that's something that we take very serious in trying to determine and identify. So we look at the enforcement and compliance efforts specifically here to what Virginia ABC did, but I will tell you, in talking to the chiefs and the directors of the different alcohol law enforcement from across the country, the plans are very similar, the efforts are very similar, and certainly the work that we're faced with is very similar. So in my agency, I've had approximately 3 full-time employees working on this, and that's all they do is work on direct shipping. But recently, to the explosion that we've seen as a result of COVID-19 and the increased demand for products to be delivered, I've expanded that to have I've doubled that amount and then some of people that are working on direct shipping. But in the past couple of years, Virginia ABC has contacted over 800 unlicensed shippers. And what does that mean by contacted? So we start out with trying to seek voluntary compliance. So we reach out, we explain what the law is in Virginia, what they're expected to do. We try to give them an application, explain to them that it's a very short process, and we try to get them in compliance. If that's unsuccessful, then we send out a letter, and we send out a cease and desist letter to them that explains to them that they need to stop this activity. And if we still cannot get compliance at that point in time, then we look to 2 avenues. One is to see if perhaps they are licensed in their home state, and if that home state alcohol law enforcement agency has any jurisdiction over this topic, we collaborate with our out-of-state partners. And then finally, we do share our unlicensed shippers list with our common carriers, and we've developed great partnerships with FedEx and UPS, and we work to have those individuals that are violating the law in Virginia to not be allowed to ship into that state anymore via those common carriers. And we've been very successful in those efforts in working with our common carrier partners. So since 2018, I'm sorry, if you go back one slide, please. We've had 355 shippers that have applied for a license, and we've approved 307 of those. We have 32 pending and 16 were withdrawn. I will note that most of the withdrawn applicants are because they were not licensed in their home state in order to sell alcohol. So they were completely out of compliance, not just with Virginia law, but actually with their home law. And you can see that we're up to, as of July 2020, we're up to 1,379 out-of-state shippers. And if you remember from a couple slides prior, that's approximately an increase of 200. So we are showing some compliance there. We are getting some licenses or some shippers that are actually complying and following the rules. Some of our statistics that we have from then and now with our unlicensed shippers, when we started our implementation phase of our plan, we were looking at 677 on an average month back in June of 2018 of unlicensed shippers, and that's over all 3 of our common carriers. After about 12 months of our enforcement efforts, working with our common carriers and getting people licensed, we saw that average number drop down by over 50%. You can see those represented there, below 300 for the months of July, August, and September. We did have a spike, it's not represented on this chart, but we did have a spike in December of 2019, which brought us some concern. However, we did see that number drop back down to this level that's represented for July, August, and September into the beginning of 2020. However, when COVID came in, so did an increase in these unlicensed shippers. Our most recent data only goes through April because, as I explained, the common carrier report is a month behind. And then, of course, it takes that 120 man hours to go through the 3 reports and then compile that data. But we've seen a significant increase in the March data, and we saw a significant increase in the April data with 460. And that's very alarming for those of us in Virginia. So we work very hard to get that number down. But again, as the market has been flooded with individuals that want to have product delivered, it's been flooded with individuals that want to ship product. So, and just in the past couple weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, we've contacted over 135. new people that have entered the market of shipping and are trying to get them in compliance now. As been mentioned, the consumer demand equates to the change in the landscape of alcohol, and it certainly applies here to shipping. In the 2020 Virginia General Assembly, we saw a bill that was introduced to allow our Virginia distillery stores to ship via common carry to consumers and licensees within the Commonwealth. What was a result of that bill was Virginia ABC was directed to conduct a study, and that's part of what's going on now. And we are meeting with industry stakeholders and conducting that study now. When this bill was first introduced, there was a limit of 12 bottles of distilled spirits for each consumer. That was reduced during the committee meetings to 6 bottles. And I know that we have a lot of prevention and education individuals on the call today. And I just point out that it's been my experience that legislators and certainly those that regulate are interested in hearing, concerns. And as these new laws are being crafted, we all should have a voice. I don't think that voice is to be one that we want to limit the industry, but it is a voice that we want to provide regulation and ensure that we maintain that public safety and health. So I'd just like to point that out for everybody. And we see this consumer demand is certainly creating the changes and challenges that we're talking about here today. So Carrie mentioned a lot of these already, enforcement challenges. I just kind of personalize them here for Virginia. Again, with our structure that we have currently here, with our normal licensees, our brick and mortar, we have very well established programs for going in and ensuring that our licensees are not selling alcohol to intoxicated persons. We sponsor training. They often, the retailers themselves, because they're specializing in the service of alcohol, whether it's a grocery store or a restaurant, they have their own internal training programs that cover things like selling to underage or selling alcohol to an intoxicated person. These same well-established programs don't exist with delivery and shipping. Some of the challenges that are presented around an underage compliance check is, where is that check going to be conducted at? Is it going to be conducted, is the regulatory agency or the law enforcement agency going to rent an apartment? Are they going to rent a hotel and ask for the delivery to be made in the hotel lobby? How do you coordinate the date the product's actually going to be delivered? So you order it off of a website, and then it might get delivered a week or 2 weeks later, depending on the common carrier schedule. These are all challenges that are very difficult in ensuring that we have compliance, ensuring that our common carriers are actually asking for that identification. In Virginia, we require all deliveries of alcohol, whether it's delivery or shipping, for them to check identification. They have to, in non-COVID times, they have to get a signature of the person. In COVID times, to reduce the touch, we've asked for them to get the first and last name off the identification. And we also require all packages to be labeled in a certain font that it contains alcohol in that package. But again, the challenge for law enforcement is how do you check that to ensure it's going on? We know that doing underage alcohol checks throughout the entire country is a way to ensure our licensees ask for IDs and refuse sale of alcohol. However, it's very challenging under the delivery and shipping market. There's also jurisdictional issues, loss of state revenue through sales tax and excise taxes, and then other public health concerns. The example I like to use is that, even in Virginia in our retail stores, if we have our normal customers that come in, all of our staff is trained very well at evaluating to ensure that the person is of age to get the alcohol and that they are sober, they're not intoxicated. And when that person comes in and walks around the store and selects their product, there's a lot of evaluation that goes on during that period of time. And with it being delivered on your doorstep, that evaluation period is almost non-existent. There's the knock at the door, you answer it, very limited interaction. You don't have to worry about being sober enough to operate the vehicle to go down to the store. So there are lots of challenges, and I think those challenges go around the ones I highlighted here for enforcement, but I also think there are public health concerns around that, especially as it relates to alcoholism and the person that can just get the alcohol delivered to their door. And that concludes my presentation. And again, we'll do questions here in a few minutes, and I'll turn it over to Ted now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. As we had a chance to review each other's slides over the last couple of days, I found that Tom's presentation is about as the most comprehensive information you'll receive on this direct shipping problem that we have. So we're gonna, for the next few minutes, we're gonna take somewhat of a different tact to perhaps show you some of the problems we find when we peel it back. Now, I have to give you a brief view of it because I love history and I like to show a little bit of background. In 1630, the Massachusetts Bay Colony had an alcohol problem. It didn't want to prohibit the strong economic keystone of the colony, so they chose strict regulation through a form of a licensing system. Now, they also appointed the first liquor law enforcement officer, which I would challenge our friends from Virginia to beat that one. For the next 300 years, the pendulum swung from high to low regulation and was generational in reality. Every 20 to 30 years, we would see the pendulum swing back. And the reasons were always provided were very, very similar to today's. We would find that the arguments were that the laws are antiquated, archaic, it was for economic development, which is much of what you hear today. And then, you know, the next generation would say, wait, what's going on here? And they would look at the social harm and look at it and how much it outweighed the short-sighted economic gain. And this went on for 300 years, at least in Massachusetts. Now, in 1933, a Massachusetts Senate study determined that this pendulum had to stop with the 21st Amendment, that we needed a system that would really preserve the public peace and order. We knew that the federal system didn't work. It was just too broad for the individual state characteristics, and the municipal control was ripe with problems regarding statewide parity. So it put into place a strong state regulatory system, which we see in pretty much all of our states today. When they did this, they really looked at the past. They did a tremendous report on it, and they said, look, we have to correct certain things. In order for this to be effective, we need convenience of access. People need to be able to pick up their alcohol and have ease of access to it. But they required some limitation. They wanted to limit the outlets because they knew then that too many outlets would cause a problem. So we implemented a quota system, as well as the correction of the tied house concerns, which clearly had proved with the saloons that were in place that this is something that needed to be corrected. Since then, I believe that we've had the most stable period in our 400 years of alcohol regulation. This system we have works. I believe this is because this system is the foundation to a healthy marketplace, alcohol marketplace. And if we allow its dismantling, if we allow the sale of alcohol without strong jurisdictional control, we will most surely return to the harmful pendulum swings of the past years. Today, we are seeing the development of an unfettered sale and delivery of alcohol into our states. And the slides I will show you shortly will really, I think, shock some of you as to the efforts that these companies are going to do this. While investigating criminal activity in bar rooms is quite frankly a lot more fun than trade or interstate work, the latter is and will be the greatest challenge to liquor law enforcement for at least the next 5 years. I'm sure of that. We've, over the last few years, after really waking up to the reality of interstate shipments, we're now dedicating half of our staff to work on these cases. Today, I'm going to cover some examples of what we're finding. And one of the things we're finding, first and foremost, is a generation that is simply not aware of the basis for alcohol law enforcement, the purposes of it, the history of it. Either that or they choose to ignore it. So quite frankly, it's up to us, liquor law enforcement agencies now to prevent this. I believe that as long as we allow unlawful deliveries, it will continue. So we strive to develop a more concerted effort where we're working with NABCA, NLLEA, My fellow agents, such as Tom, we've had a lot of conversations on this. We need to put a full court press on repairing this. In Massachusetts, it took a while for us to make this a priority, but we've taken a bifurcated approach. We're looking at licensed direct wine shippers as well as the unlicensed interstate shippers. And as Tom said, those are our priority. In our state, rather than send out letters based on the express company reports, and this has just been a decision on my part, we've chosen to make direct purchases to establish direct evidence to the unlawful sale. We feel it's going to benefit us in the long run. We look for tight cases that are not appealable. So the development of direct wine shipping in Massachusetts is working well overall. We have 1,200 wineries getting their product to the Massachusetts consumer as was intended. The sales are increasing each year. However, what you will note in the bottom right-hand corner is that the inequality in the sales. We find that 25% of the $48 million in sales is going to just 1% of these licensees. This appears, in our opinion, to be caused by a few areas of concern. Next slide, please. Here we have, and these next two slides are strictly on direct wine shippers, not so much on the unlicensed. We have a European winery selling directly to the Massachusetts consumer. Through their website, they're accepting payment and then shipping the wine to a direct wine shipper licensee that is basically a warehouse in New York, where for a fee, the wine is put on an express truck to Massachusetts. We also have questions in this case of the actual production, whether this direct wine shipper is actually producing. We have seen, and I'll point out in a few other slides, that we see the direct wine shippers developing alternating proprietorships with minimal to no actual production. This next slide, we have a similarly licensed direct wine shipper in California with, again, questionable true production. This company is allowing unlicensed wineries throughout the United States and internationally to utilize its license, its direct wine shipper license, for a 15% fee. The orders are placed through the unlicensed winery website with shared control with this platform company. That causes the payment to go to the direct wine shippers if the delivery originating from the unlicensed winery. So where the order is received by the unlicensed winery and the alcohol is shipped from the unlicensed winery. But we have this platform company in the middle. So that's a concern. And we think that's, if you look at the 1%, we think the majority of those companies under the 1% are operating in this manner. Some additional findings. We are finding unlicensed producers or rectifiers. And if you look at their websites, you'll really see that the websites offer beautiful young couples strolling through rolling vineyards out in California, enjoying a glass of wine. But when you drill down, what we're finding, and this goes to the quality of the product that our consumers are receiving, what you'll find at the bottom layer are several LLCs importing other than standard product and rectifying it in a rented area of an industrial complex. It's not what's advertised, and I question the quality of some of the product. Similarly, we are finding shell companies that are able to obtain TTB, state, and then accordingly direct wine shipper licensure because they have the TTB permit, and then act as clearinghouses for international retailers selling hundreds of wines that are not under their label. They're an online retailer, and in some cases, they're international online retailers. Our focus here is to look into the legitimacy of the TTB and state permits. We seem to be in a time where regulatory officials are afraid to say no or are simply rubber stamping applications through an electronic licensing system. I would challenge our colleagues at TTB and state agencies to ensure the legitimacy of the winery during the licensing process. I think this goes to the very basis of the direct wine shipper system. We need to look at the true function of the applicant. For example, I'll give you an example in Massachusetts. We had an applicant for a winery license that was planning a large tap room. He just wanted a cheap bar room in a location in Boston. The production facility for the wine was a 4x4 space, a closet with one piece of equipment. To the point where if you opened up the spigot on the piece of equipment, the wine was going to be off of the licensed premises. It could not reasonably function as a winery. We knew this, yet it had received federal approval. So as licensing agencies, we really need to look and be able to determine, are these real? Is this legitimate? And most importantly, we need to be able to say, no, we do not feel you're a legitimate winery. Unlicensed interstate sellers, and we're going to go into everything I'm going to talk to you about here is regarding distilled spirits. This is not a wine shipper. Unlicensed interstate sellers are our primary focus, particularly distilled spirits. Strong jurisdictional control over entities selling and distributing alcohol is the foundation of a system that has provided us with the most effective alcohol distribution in our 400-year history. The jurisdictional licensing process that was put into place to ensure that persons of good character and were responsible for alcohol distribution, as well as to provide an incentive to conduct lawful and safe business. We lose this when multi-level companies can open up in a state or multiple states, or as I'll show you in a few minutes, on a cloud, to deliver alcohol to our residents who have come to expect safe and quality alcoholic beverages. We lose jurisdictional control. This is our biggest challenge right now. Here, we have a web platform, and this is something that I just learned about, I don't know, the last several months. But this platform, as we dug in and we drilled into it, there's no available business filing, no email contact or phone number, and the physical addresses of a residential apartment where our jurisdiction would clearly be limited. The website offers the alcohol for sale. It receives payment. It takes a 15% fee and then forwards the order to a California retailer. This California retailer packages up the alcohol and brings it to an express store. It's not picked up at this store. It brings it to a store in a neighboring community, where it is then shipped under the individual name of the owner of the retail outlet. Similarly, we have an unlicensed platform in New York with no available business filing or contact information. The website offers the alcohol for sale, receives payment, takes the percentage fee, and then forwards the order to a Kentucky retailer who packages the alcohol, brings it to the express store, and again, where it's shipped under the individual name of the owner. In this particular case, I want to give a shout out to our friends at Kentucky ABC, who did an immediate response for us, and we're just great to work with. Here it gets a little bit more complicated. Here we are seeing the merging of unlicensed platforms with distilleries. Now keep in mind, these platforms have absolutely no licensure. We can't even find out where their business is located. They merge with the distillery. They often merge with retailers. And the website here appeared to have mutual access and control. This platform was operating on behalf of the distillery. The platform accepted the payment, and the order is shipped from a fulfillment house licensed as a direct wine shipper in California. It is not licensed in Massachusetts to ship distilled spirits, and that case is currently pending. The process of the delivery from the distillery to the fulfillment house has not yet been determined. From the fulfillment house, the alcohol is shipped by way of a non-traditional express company. This is not your usual modes of transport. To another express company that was established in Massachusetts within the year, which, from what they told us, for the primary purpose of making deliveries on behalf of the fulfillment house. And for this last slide, in this case, we tracked the process back to a European online retailer. It actually originated, I believe, in Germany. And then it established what appears to be a straw corporation in the US. That again is operating out of a residential address. The US company has established franchise stores in various states that are often licensed as alcohol retailers. So in our case, the Wyoming retailer had established a website where it offered numerous distilled spirits labels for sale. In this case, we purchased the product produced in South Central Iowa distillery. The website company accepted the payment, forwarded the order to an associated fulfillment house, follow along here, in Nevada, with the same corporate ownership as the Wyoming retailer, where the alcohol was packaged for delivery through a traditional express company. Here again, our friends at Wyoming ABC were great. They responded to us immediately, and I know that they have been active in addressing this. So let's look at a summary. What do we have here? What are we dealing with? We have unknown entities operating as web platforms, selling distilled spirits into our states, utilizing multi-level corporations to avoid detection, in partnership with other multi-level corporations, each conducting a separate function of the production, storage, sale, or delivery, with no Massachusetts regulatory supervision or accountability until it reaches the express company, and that express company is shipping it to an unlicensed residential address, again, where we have limited jurisdiction. So what are we doing to address the problem? Much like Virginia, we had to adapt to address this. We have a problem that is putting our citizens at both a consumer and public safety risk. We've had to adapt from our solid state regulatory and adjudicatory control to utilizing partnerships that can assist us in our goals. And our partners in this are paramount. Without them, I would be stuck with no control. First, we send cease and desist letters to the seller, which in many cases involves multiple parties. So we're sending out a lot of cease and desist letters. We're sending it to the platform. We're sending it to the retailer. We're sending it to the fulfillment house, and we're sending it to the eventual shipper or express company. The responses, and here's where the purpose of all these shell corporations comes into play. The responses range from the company agreeing to cease delivery, which is great, to a position that they are operating under someone else's license, which is very, very common, particularly in the wine industry, as you saw in some of those cases. They really believe they can do this. This is the mindset of, I think, the generation of businesses out there, that they can operate under someone else's licenses, which in Massachusetts is clearly illegal. And finally, to a denial that they made the sale. It was the other company. So when we find, it's in some of those diagrams that I just showed you, we have everyone pointing a finger at the other guy, saying, oh no, it wasn't us, it was him. And that clearly is the purpose of the many shell companies. Next, we notify the express companies, where we received great cooperation with immediate impact. I have to say UPS has been just outstanding. Once we provide notice of the unlawful delivery, the express company stops deliveries to Massachusetts from that company and has on a few occasions canceled the account. We found that some sellers to then utilize individual customer accounts at express storefront locations. This is just a workaround that we're seeing come into play. We also notify the fulfillment houses. Why? They're just receiving it and sticking it on an express truck. Well, when they put it on that express truck, they're sending it to it's alcoholic beverages. They're sending it to Massachusetts unlawfully. They're concerned when the express company says, hey, listen, Massachusetts ABCC tells us this is illegal. They stop it because they're concerned about their other products. A lot of these fulfillment houses are carrying an awful lot of other products, which is their primary business. And finally, we contact the state liquor authority. I would suggest to you that if you're a state liquor agency, this is your strongest leverage. We contact the agents and the seller and shipper states. We have also received great cooperation. The impact here is significant because the seller now has agents with direct jurisdiction visiting their physical premises to deliver the cease and desist letter, which is a heck of a lot different than receiving one from the post office in Massachusetts. And there's a potential immediate ramification to that. I cannot possibly overemphasize the importance and value of the NLLEA contact list, where I can communicate directly with my colleagues, my counterparts in every state, whether it's Tom in Virginia, Tom Montoya in Wyoming. This is just a tremendous strength that gives us some leverage and some control over the interstate shipment of alcohol. I would encourage you, those of you who are not active in NLLEA, to get active. I think what you'll find is that ability for me to pick up the phone and call Tom and have Tom send agents and address a problem that's addressing us in Massachusetts is just a tremendous value. Overall, it's going to be a big challenge. We have a lot ahead of us. We have to adapt to the companies that are adapting constantly, and we're just going to keep going at it. I appreciate your time. I kind of bounced through that, but I hope I gave you an example of the challenges of dealing with some of these companies. And I'll put it back to Carrie.
Thank you, Ted. Yes, lots of challenges, a lot to digest. Thank you, Ted and Tom, again, for giving the shout out to NLLEA. So where are we going? Direct consumer enforcement efforts. We're working to establish enforcement protocols for this new and growing environment. We are looking for opportunities to get this information to coalitions, public policymakers, regulators, and enforcement partners to share this information. We are committed to continuing to raise awareness on behalf of our alcohol law enforcement members about how these policy changes are impacting their capacity to ensure this is part of the discussion in every state. And we want to be a go-to organization for policymakers and others who want best practice guidance on alcohol law enforcement. We hope you will consider the NLLEA as a resource. And I will pass it to Cassie, I believe, who's going to field some questions for us.
Yes, so I have been tracking them. I tried to be diligent about it. So the first couple of questions we had were regarding the webinar that's coming up in September. So just for folks, that's September 24th from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time. And that's going to be about alcohol consumption during the pandemic. The next set of questions we got were related to if there's any data on ID failure rates regarding home delivery. So certainly Tom, Ted, if you want to speak to that, if you have any specific rates related to that.
Thanks, Cassie. In Virginia, we do not have any data on that as reference to the fail date. ID fail rate, we do not have any data on that right now.
How about you, Ted?
Oh, we need to unmute you. Unmute.
Maybe Ted, if you can put it in the chat, that would allow people to see if you have those rates. Moving on to the next question, it was related to, this one's for you, Carrie. First of all, several questions about specific states and if they're members of NLEA. So I don't know if you want to, specifically to Nevada and North Carolina, asking if their law enforcement happen to be members. So go ahead.
Currently, did you say New York or North Carolina?
North Carolina.
Okay, North Carolina are members of the NLLEA. Nevada is not a member, although there was a coalition that had some grant funding that did send liquor enforcement to our conference last year. So every state typology is different and how their alcohol law enforcement is set up, and whether it might be state enforcement or local enforcement that is doing that, and we welcome those other departments, not just alcohol law enforcement, to be a part of our membership. And if I wanted to back up a little bit on that last question for some failure rates, I do know that California has some data, and that has been printed in the Washington Post, and then Vermont, I believe, has some data on their data dashboard.
Great. And another question for you, Carrie. You mentioned earlier an 80% violation rate with alcohol deliveries. Can you clarify what region and how big that sample size was?
Okay, and again, that's where I was going with California's data, and that was pulled from Washington Post, and also some conversations in our chiefs meeting, and also from data reported by Vermont. I specifically do not have the how many checks were done in comparison.
Okay. And someone just made a comment about compliance checks with home deliveries. And is there any kind of information out there on how to conduct compliance checks related to home deliveries?
Yes, there is information, and I know North Carolina has some training and training videos, and we would have loved to have shared one today. Unfortunately, we couldn't. There will be some future webinars with North Carolina and how they conducted. It was a study that they did with home delivery alcohol compliance checks. They did not issue citations. It was more of a training.
There were a couple questions related to DUI rates, home violence, underage drinking, and if we're seeing those kind of an uptick in those outcomes as it relates to cocktails to go and home delivery.
Is this for me, or would you want me to defer to my enforcement?
I would say defer to your enforcement.
I think in reference to domestic violence, that's probably a question best answered by a local law enforcement police chief. However, I have been tracking a little bit of that data during the COVID-19, and most departments are reporting an uptick in some domestic violence. However, there's not data that supports that it's necessarily related to cocktails to go or the increase that we're seeing in home delivery or home shipping.
Yeah, same here. When this first started, we saw the massive increases in volume coming out from the liquor stores, and every police chief I talked to was just gearing up, waiting for the domestic violence to kick in. And my understanding is that it has. Without being able to give you data, I believe it's relatively significant.
Carrie, a lot more questions coming in about specific states and whether they're members of NLEA. How can folks get a hold of you to ask you directly that question? I don't want to keep reading state by state, but it would be helpful for them to know how they could get a hold of you.
Sure. So the easiest way, I don't know if they want to go back to the slide, but would be through email. It's my name, Carrie Christophus at nllea.org. You can shoot me an email and I'll certainly respond and check as to whether your state is a member and how we can get you to be a member.
So another question specific to Virginia, Tom, has Virginia considered an alcohol tax increase or any other kind of revenue stream to help support these increased demands on law enforcement, specifically to do compliance checks? Or any kind of monitoring, I would say that the question is referencing any kind of monitoring to ensure compliance among licensees.
We've had great success in Virginia in working with our legislature, our Virginia General Assembly, as well as the governor's administration, and as well as our industry stakeholders on identifying opportunities to increase revenue to combat alcohol-related issues. Approximately 2 General Assembly sessions ago, as specific to direct shipping, because of the problem we were experiencing with that, we were able to increase that license fee for a direct shipper's license to the $230. I believe it was $100 prior to that, and that did allow us a position to use the funding from that license to combat direct shipping, and we've seen that apply for other issues that we're facing as well. And again, I think we're probably an anomaly when it comes to that. I'm not sure every state approaches it that way or has the support of their industry members and their General Assembly and administration like we do.
So Tom and Ted, I think this is a question for both of you regarding how you engage with the public health and the prevention community in your work, especially as it relates to home delivery legislation.
Well, we have, a pretty good communication going. One of the individuals is on the call today watching the webinar. It's a constant dialogue, but the answer is tough, right? You're talking about home delivery. There are a lot of jurisdictional issues here. If you're not doing strictly a compliance check and you're having a delivery to an individual residence, how you structure those compliance checks is relatively important. So that's a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. There were a number of questions related to if this slide deck, this webinar will be available, and I know Maggie will touch on this, but it will be archived on our website in 7 to 10 business days following the webinar at nabca.org. So let's see if we have a little more time for a few more questions. So let me just see if I have a few more here. There's a number of questions about how to prevent youth access in this era of home delivery. And certainly, I know that's kind of a broad question, but does anybody want to take that one?
I can start if you'd like. I think that you have to start with your laws or rules around home delivery. And in Virginia, we do require that identification be checked. So it's not like UPS or FedEx, if they're complying with our laws, can just leave that package at the door. We also require that the package be labeled. And then, of course, they have to check that government issued ID. And then they have to note in their delivery application software of who they actually delivered that product with. So those are some of the steps that Virginia has taken up to this point to ensure access control to underage. I think some of the other items that might be out there is maybe requiring training for those delivery drivers, whether it's a third-party vendor, the retail delivery driver, or a FedEx or UPS in reference to making those deliveries so that they're familiar, much like we see in our normal licensees.
And then there was, oh, go ahead, Ted.
I was going to keep in mind that we have shifted the burden here to the express drivers, right? So you're the UPS or FedEx driver that pulls up to your house with 10 deliveries from Amazon or for these companies, then it's obviously overworked. They now have the responsibility for checking ID. The responsibility we're looking into the responsibility of the seller. If the order is accepted and payment is accepted, what do we, where's the chance? I think we have some opportunity there that we're looking into, but it's tough when the burden is on a UPS driver.
All righty, I think we're really close to time, and we had a couple more questions come in specific to is NABCA considering doing a white paper on this topic, and that's a great question. I think there was a lot of interest in this webinar, and certainly there's a lot of consideration to that end, so stay tuned. And Maggie, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Cassie, for your help today, and Rachel on the back end. And of course, our star speakers, our expert panelists of Carrie and Ted and Tom. Thank you guys so very much for being here with us today and joining us on this NABCA webinar. And if anybody has questions that we didn't address, feel free to email communications@nabca.org, and we'll be more than happy to send it forward to our panelists. To that end, we will, if you'd like a copy of the handouts and you'd like to include that in your communications with us as well, you're very welcome to do that. And then again, as Cassie mentioned, this webinar will be available within 7 to 10 business days on the NABCA website. So you can listen to it again and pick up some more information that maybe you may have missed. And there are other NABCA webinars that are on the website as well that we have available for public consumption, and other materials as well. So your feedback is going to be important, and we'll be sending a quick survey for you to complete. Would appreciate if you take the time to do that. And of course, if there's anything that you have that you would like to address in terms of questions or future webinar topics and ideas, feel free to share that with us as well. So other than that, once again, thank you to everybody, and thank you attendees for listening to this webinar, and we wish you an awesome and safe day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.